Okay, good morning, everybody. Hi, I'm Jillian Gillette. I'm the program manager for California Integrated Mobility at Caltrans. And I came to Caltrans in 2019 from the city and county of San Francisco, and before that from the private sector. Your own. To you.
Thank you, Jillian. My name is Jeroen Kok, calling in from beautiful sunny Amsterdam in Europe, leading the global payment and mobility practice for Rebel Group, and very excited to be here today, but also very excited to be with the CalITP program for the last year and a half, supporting Jillian and crew and Laurie on this amazing endeavor. Thank you. And over to the next panelist.
I'll go. I'm Elizabeth Saul. I'm a sole proprietor under the name Urban Labs. I'm in Seattle, Washington right now, but I spent most of my professional career in California in the Bay Area. I am leading the CalITP Mobility Service Data team, and that's why I'm here today. Go to Laurie.
Thank you. Hi, everybody. Lori Pepper. I'm the Deputy Secretary for Innovative Mobility Solutions at the California State Transportation Agency. And the agency is the oversight agency for all of the transportation related departments, including Caltrans, which is why I get to work on this project. So I think we can get started. So the California Integrated Travel Project, or CalITP, is one that we are both very proud of and excited to implement, as it fulfills a promise in our state rail plan and also supports several of our state goals by looking at our transit and rail network in a whole new, and I would argue, improved way. Next slide, please. So California finalized its latest state rail plan in 2018. And this 20-year plan lays out the potential that we see for the transit and rail network to provide critical services to our residents. It also details high impact investment opportunities for the state. And so the rail plan includes an overarching goal of providing access to an integrated state-of-the-art rail system that will revolutionize personal mobility and enhance quality of life. And to achieve this, the plan directs the state to make targeted investments in integrated ticketing and travel planning by 2022. And so these efforts also support the state's longer-term goals for increasing equity, spurring economic development, and fighting climate change. And last September, Governor Newsom signed Executive Order N7920, which outlines multiple initiatives focused on fighting climate change and related issues. And included in that EO is a directive to increase transit ridership as a key component of California's strategy to reduce greenhouse gas emissions and combat climate change to benefit all Californians. And implementation of CalITP is a significant part of achieving that goal. And while we're setting this program up in California, there is an opportunity for states and transit agencies across the US to use our procurement vehicles to set up your own program, depending on your rules and regulations. Next slide, please. And so now I'm going to turn it over to Jillian to start walking through the specifics of how CalITP works and how you may be able to participate as well.
Cool. Thanks, Lori. Well, so what is integrated mobility? So integrated mobility in practice is defined a lot about the way we work, and what it is in many respects is removing barriers, just making it really easy to use transportation in all of its forms. So CalITP is a group of people at Caltrans and working with Caltrans who have both experience in the private sector and in the public sector. We've worked with standards, and we are fundamentally looking at trying to make things simpler, less expensive, and equitable. By removing barriers, both for people who provide transit services and transportation services, and also for riders. So next slide, please. It says here affordable, convenient, and reliable. Those are our top line goals, and that's true. But that also means things like transparent. You need to be able to find, you need to be able to see transit. You need to be able to find it easily on your phone in particular. You need to make it easy to pay for it on your phone. And you need to make that experience true for everyone. Or else transit will continue to be a last resort. It needs to be the top of mind and top of wallet choice for everybody. Next slide, please. So with those goals and that sort of attitude, what we started was a conversation with the private sector, because fundamentally you really need to work with your customers. And in our case, that means the 95% of Californians who don't really ever think about taking transit. How do we get them? What is the experience that they need and that they expect? So in 2019, we started with a market sounding and talked to the private sector and asked them a series of questions. And the questions were, if California were to make investments differently and act differently, what should those be so that you could work with us? And if we changed how we invest and how we do things, what would you do? And while the market sounding initially was a lot of people trying to sell us things, it quickly changed into sort of a therapy session of the private sector saying, oh, you guys are really hard to work with. Please remove the barriers. You know, in God's name, there are some standards. Could you stop yammering about standards and actually implement them? One of the hallmarks of the United States is that you can look on every baseboard in every building in the United States and recognize what a three-pronged outlet is. That's not true in every country. It's something that we've achieved in the United States. And once you have a three-pronged outlet, you can argue about what you want to plug into it, and you can compete about different things to plug into it, but everybody agrees on an outlet. So that was the most consistent information that we heard from the private sector was, you can't find transit. There's, hundreds of agencies, they all make things make different decisions. You can't find it, you can't pay for it, and the pricing is bazoo. So there are standards. There's the general transit feed specification, and there is the EMV standard in payments. Adopt those, and then work on getting everybody to actually implement them and not just talk about them. So next slide. So, okay, that's fine. We talked to the private sector. They gave us some candid advice. We went back to our offices and crunched some numbers and looked at the disaggregated data in California and worked on sort of the beginnings of a business case, which is our feasibility study that's up on our website. So we came up with a plan. So here's what we're doing about it, about the information that we heard from the private sector and that we verified with the public sector. And we've based our program on three fundamental pillars. So they are enabling contactless payments. You need to provide a digital alternative. And you need to do, and the second pillar is you need to do that for everyone. Everyone needs to have a digital alternative. And that means working with the discounts in transit and automating that experience to remove the pain for the customer and the transit operators. And thirdly, and sort of the prerequisite to everything is that you need to be able to see the service and you need to understand what the schedules are and where the stops are and what the pricing is. So you need accurate, reliable, real-time information. Next slide, please. So we're not the first to do this kind of process or to come up with these kinds of conclusions. You can see examples here from sort of around the world and around the United States as well, that standardizing and organizing, federating certain things can produce enormous efficiency and customer satisfaction improvements that you can quantify. Next up, next slide, please. So now, how are we actually going to do this? I want to turn it over to Yaron, who has done a lot of this work and really leads the sort of the payments piece for us. So Yaron, please take it away.
Thank you, Gillian. And also thank you, Lily Sharp, key member of our team, to help us with the slides and tracking the questions while they come in. So we'll try and answer them as soon as they happen. But yes, indeed, contactless payments division, making paying for transit as easy as buying a cup of coffee. Now, we are working in about 16 countries in the world at the moment on similar projects, but there's no client like Gillian and Laurie that is relentless in their pursuit to really push the envelope on this easy. And it's interesting to think about it, because 30 years ago, if you would open a coffee shop to make buying your coffee as easy as possible, or a restaurant, you would spend quite a bit of money and quite a bit of time to get your whole banking setup done. You had to probably configure some of your POS system. You had to go through a lot of paperwork to get all the licenses, like for the different brands, in order to have it done. And so you probably be spending for a restaurant, it would be up to the $10,000s of dollars, and you would be spending probably 2 or 3 months to get it all going. Today, if we decide to sell some awesome Dutch coffee, if there were any coffee like that, we could order it today on the website, and we have a complete setup like you're looking at on our doormat the next day. And even better, if I don't like this setup, in next week, I have another setup that does exactly the same kind of thing, because all the data and all that is stored in the cloud, and it's just a simple device. So buying this cup of coffee is actually a good analogy, because 30 years ago, it wasn't that easy. Now it is. So what happened? It's using those standards that Gillian was talking about. It's applying scale, and it really makes this clear marcation of, if you want to make coffee, let's focus on coffee, not on the payment. Why don't we do the same in transit? If you want to focus on transit, let's focus on our service in transit, and let's make that paying for it as easy as possible. What that leads to? Well, you use the device that people have in their pocket as much as possible. Bank cards, phones, other bank credentials. It's an improved customer experience because you don't have to go and load your card for a specific need. Second, it leads to higher ridership. Globally, you saw the numbers on 2 slides ago. Everywhere it's implemented, people that work in transit always kind of forget the hurdles that we put people through to use transit. But if you take them away, you can see the difference. And great to see that the lower cost for both the riders, but also the providers. Currently, with our demo that Laurie will talk about later, we're comparing cost of the new contactless acceptance systems to the old, like mechanical ones. And it is like percentages lower maintenance costs because of its simplicity. Reduced emission because of fast onboarding. This is a key point also during the pandemic. The transit agencies have been asking for safe, contactless, fast onboarding. And the contactless demonstrations in California have been showing that advantage. But lastly, and I think next to the easy, most important, it's equitable. And we'll get to that point. It's already a question out there, like, what if we don't have a bank card? What if, there are 25% in California under an unbanked. But also, can these new ways be opened for people that are eligible for a discount? The systems that are in place that come off the shelf have fare capping, which is the fairest way to deal with paying for transit, because you don't have to buy an expensive pass to get a cheap fare. And we are integrated from the start because we all use the same technology. And then the most complex slide of the whole presentation. So bear with me for a second. If you would say integrated fare systems or integrated travel program, most of the people in the call, and if you talked to me 3 years ago as well, you'd be thinking about integration of systems, system integration, right? Because we need to have all these different systems. How would you put it together? We've taken a fundamentally different approach that Gillian explained about this kind of using standard rails, using the outlets that are out there rather than trying to reinvent the wheel, and making sure that these outlets fits together like Lego blocks. And here on this slide, a couple of the key Lego blocks that are going to be the components that we're building on. So the model you see in front of you is the model that is the model for banking. It's 4 corners. It's been used for the last 60 years. You got the rider on the left, the transit provider, the merchant on the right. And the rider has the rider's bank or issuing that provides you with either a digital or a physical card. And the transit provider has a contract with an acquiring processor or provider's bank. What we are doing is making sure that on the right side of this slide, you see the validator, the file calculation, the payment processing. Those are separate blocks, separate Lego blocks that we are now procuring for as we speak, as separate, identified with nice outlets or nice APIs, as you may say, that how to connect. So if you, as a transit agency, want to buy validators, you can select your own validator, you can select your own fare calculation software, and you can select your own payment processor. You want to switch the validators, but you want to keep the other two, that's fine. That's what Lego blocks are about. The tender for this, for a bench for all of California, is now open. And we obviously are very excited to see the response to that in the next couple of weeks. Next slide, please. Because we made a website for that in case you wanted to, like, what is he talking about? The website is camobilitymarketplace.org. That's where you find the link to the DGS website that allows you to register for this tender. Again, it is the Lego block approach where there's room for the new players that are agile, that are also niche, that focus on using the common technology rail, the EMV rails, to accept payments as validators for transit processing and for acquiring as described on the previous page on the right. Looking forward for your response there. And over to the next. Because once that is in place, 320 transit agencies in California, for example, that's the vision, could all accept these cards, whatever one you have in your pocket already. If it's your card here as shown as in the picture, which is literally live, listo, today, you can also use your wallet, your watch, or your iPhone, etc. But how do we deal with that eligibility? How can you make sure that if you're 65 plus, you actually get a discount, like say 50%, when you use that card, because it's your bank card? And this is a first in the world where we, from the start, make sure that these kind of discounts are part of the program where you can use your bank card, your own, but you can register that bank card at the DMV where they can verify you are indeed 65 plus, and therefore this card and you are eligible for this 50% discount, which is explained on the next slide. So there we go. The only thing you need is a bank card, either digital or physical. You go to a website which will be live in a few weeks. You can register, and then it will be verified if you are indeed that age. And from there on, that card linked to you. And when you use that bank card, you can, at the transit agencies that are now going live, MST, SecRT, and more to come very soon, will automatically take care of your discount for you. You're starting with the age, but the other discounts that you're all very familiar with, like veterans or students, will come as the program is rolling out. And I think that's for me. And over to Elizabeth to talk about transit data, our vision.
Thanks, Jeroen. All that is very exciting. And there's been a lot of questions in the Q&A about how we're actually benefiting riders. And aside from giving them a really easy way to pay that's already in their pocket, we really want to make sure that they not only can buy transit the same way they can buy coffee, but they actually have access to that menu. And they actually know all the things on that menu on how to travel that matter to them. So what matters to them is not just how's the quickest way for me to travel, but it's, can I get a seat? Is there room for my wheelchair? Can I get off at the station on my wheelchair? Is there an elevator? How much is it going to cost? And can I pay with what's in my pocket, or do I need to scrounge for pennies and quarters and dimes in my sofa in order to ride, especially going back to transit, as we are now actually charging fares and we're not in practice and don't have all of those things at our fingertips. All of this information is going to be really critical to people, getting people back on transit. And also something else that has been a factor in some large cities in the past, but we're newly cognizant of it, is how crowded is that vehicle that I'm going to get on? Am I going to feel safe or crowded? And this has been, an issue in many cities pre-COVID, but it's certainly something that is at utmost importance now. So we've been thinking about this from the rider perspective, and also thinking about it from the transit operator perspective of who has all of this data. Does the transit operator, the transit provider, have the best copy of this data that we're providing to the transit riders? Or is it those apps and maps providers? Right now, what's happening is it's kind of a mixture of both. And so our vision for transit data is that the transit providers themselves have the best, most complete and accurate picture of their own operations, all those things that we said that matter to riders. And they share that with riders in that standardized format. And that standardized format can then be used by any application of your choice: Apple Maps, Google Maps, Transit app, your own application that you want to develop for you and your friends. As long as it accepts that standard being GTFS, you can provide that information to yourself. Next slide. So how do we get to all of this data? Right now, there's a global standard, and that global's for providing information to riders, which is GTFS, the General Transit Feed Specification, and for real-time data, the real-time GTFS specification. But why do we have these missing data pieces? Why are riders not getting the pieces of information that they need? And what we found is that there's a lot of flexibility in these standards, and often they're not, there's not a complete understanding of like everything that needs to happen. It's as if we're providing the outlet, but you can have any variety of voltage when you plug into that outlet. We're not sure what information is going to come out. You just know the format of the information that's going to come out. So the first thing we did in our sort of theory of change is sort of setting clear expectations for what sort of data should we be expecting to provide to riders. And we've done that in what the California minimum GTFS guidelines that I'll go into in a minute. And we've also done that for all of those other plugs and other data standards that need to happen for all of the Lego blocks in the back room that the transit providers need to make work in order to be able to provide that information to the riders. Once we talked to people about that, we realized that there's a lot more, and that's where our interoperability principles fall into place. And the second thing that we're doing is sort of assessing how we're doing compared to those expectations. So how are the hundreds of transit providers in California doing with respect to providing that information to riders? And you can actually see these beautiful reports that our team has come up with called reports.calitp.org. And you can actually look and see how each transit provider for fixed route service right now, and we'll be expanding that later to more service types. How are they actually doing with respect to providing that information to riders? So I invite you to visit that as well. We also have been doing in-depth assessments on every single transit provider in the state. We're at 75% we've done these in-depth assessments with them, sort of talked them through it, the in-depth assessments. And then the third part is actually helping them meet those and understanding what their barriers are to meeting these expectations, and developing a strategy that we, both agree to what we need to do in order to meet these expectations for riders. And some of that is providing direct technical assistance, and some of it is providing some universal tooling or support to the transit providers themselves. Next slide, please. So the first set of expectations, as I said, is these California minimum GTFS guidelines. And they really talk about like what's supposed to come out of that outlet when I plug into GTFS. And it should be that you should be able to basically see all those things that are available. You should be able to see all your transit. It should be provided. You should have real-time access to real-time updates about your transit. So you're not having to sort of triangulate information from a lot of different sources. All that data is sort of available to you in one place. And as the but those guidelines were, the version 1 of them was drafted out for comment last summer. We released it in the fall, and have been working with transit providers to achieve that ever since. As we've moved forward, we realized that there's been gaps in the actual GTFS specification itself for providing that information, in particular for fares. Fares have been, unfortunately, are extremely complex to represent. And while we're working on simplifying fares, we also need to be able to accurately represent them in order and provide that information, not just on what fares are available to transit riders, but also how you can pay. And that information needs to come through in the form of GTFS. And so we're working on evolving the specification. And as the specification evolves, we need to evolve these guidelines. And so this is a constant feedback loop that we're working on, of like adding the specifications, adding to the guidelines. And so version 2 of the guidelines, which includes some of this information about fares and ways to pay, the release candidate is available and out for comment now. We'll put the link. We invite everybody to comment. We'd appreciate comments. And the comments are accepted through July 21st. We hope to hear from you all. Next slide. And then, as I said before, it's one thing to have a sort of contract or agreement about what information we're providing to riders in the form of GTFS. But also what really matters is making sure that transit providers have the infrastructure in their back office systems that actually is capable of providing that information to riders. So how do all those Lego blocks fit together, if at all? And that's where our mobility data interoperability principles come into play. We're in the process of drafting these with a lot of other transit provider stakeholders and NGOs, and we'll expand that to a public draft sometime in the coming weeks. And really, this is a contract between basically different components of those back office systems, be they APCs, be they AVL components, be that what have you, head signs. And it's basically saying an agreement to use these standard languages, these data standards, and an agreement to work on data standards where they don't exist, or a commitment to open APIs. And we really think that this is going to not only make GTFS data more available to riders, but it's going to improve how transit providers are able to provide service. They're going to be spending more time optimizing their service and doing their planning, as opposed to being limited by the technology and the interoperability of the technology that they're using. When we interviewed we have some great transit provider partners, and hearing some of their stories about triple data entry in order to change their schedules really spurred this, like, oh, that should not happen. We don't want to pay public employees to do triple data entry. Those Legos should work together instead of having to piecemeal them together, fit them together. And also a lot of transit providers, staff were dealing with having to buy lots of software or extensions to fit things together. And that's a really inefficient way to do business. If for each component you had to buy a special Lego block adapter for every single type of Lego color, that is just a really expensive way for us to be providing transit service. I mean, it doesn't have to be that way. we can all speak the same language. So we really think we're going to save a lot of time and money. And we're really excited to work with not only all of the transit providers and NGOs in this space, but also the vendors in this space on this moving forward. So look for a public draft of that in the coming weeks. And if you're a transit provider or a public interest organization, we'd love to hear from you on the admin draft as well. So with that, I think I'm done. I'm going to bring it back to Lori, who's going to talk about bringing it all together for our demonstration projects.
Great, thanks so much, Elizabeth. So bringing all three of these project components together, again, it's the contactless payments, the automated discounts, and the accurate and reliable transit data. We've recently launched 2 demonstration projects with transit providers in the state to show how they can deliver consistent and reliable service while also improving the rider experience. Next slide, please. In May 2021, so just a couple months ago, Monterey Salinas Transit became the first system in California to offer open loop contactless payments on their buses. And so this means riders can pay by using what's already in their wallets, by tapping their contactless bank cards or using their digital wallets through smart devices. And in the coming months, MST is going to be piloting the new automated benefits tool. And we'll be starting with older Americans and allowing them to automatically receive their discount when they tap, so they won't have to share personal data with each transit agency that they ride. And on that point, privacy is obviously very important to us. And so the way that the automated discount works is that the question, through the system that's sent to the DMV is a yes or no question. So DMV, is this person over 65? DMV will say yes or no, as opposed to sending, a birth date or anything like that. And we think cutting down on that, on the information transfer, is something that we're trying to do with all the discounts, figuring out what are those yes or no questions that we can ask. I also want to point out that to ensure seamless trip planning, MST also outfitted their entire system with Gtfs data feeds. And so they are now producing standardized open source data so that any of the trip planning apps can easily ingest for their customers. Next slide, please. And so just last month, SAC-RT became the first transit provider in the state to accept contactless payments aboard their light rail system. And just like MST, SAC-RT is also going to launch automated discounts soon as well. And so now I will hand it back to Jillian. Oh, sorry, next slide, to wrap up the presentation.
Thanks, Lori. Thank you for your leadership and helping us with rolling this out across the state and bringing it all the pieces together. So to wrap up, I guess let's take it to the number one rule, which is know your customer. Know what the market is doing, what the customer experience is like, where people buy things and where people use things in mobility. Don't reinvent the wheel. There are standardized technologies, courtesy of our friends that make phones and the operating systems on phones and the cloud, that are defining the user experience, and that's what the customer expects. So don't redo that. Plug in, and then take on the appropriate role for the DOT, which is organizing the transit operators and helping them connect to their customer to provide not only lifeline service, but to be the conduit for solving some of the social safety net issues that we have here. To make sure that their customers' experience is the same as any other customer's experience in other mobility arenas. And so this is a how, not just a what. And we know that this how can be that you see these same kinds of problems on the roads, frankly. The longest lines on the bridges are the cash only lines. There are people, the underbanked and unbanked issue is true across all of the modes, and transit is the right place to address that. So next slide. That's it for us for our slides. We welcome the questions and the commentary, and here's how you get hold of us, and we would encourage you to join our mailing list. Thanks.
Thank you all. This is Lily. I've been monitoring the chat, and thanks for all the questions we've gotten so far. If you have other questions you'd like for us to cover in the next few minutes, please put them into the Q&A function and we'll make sure to get to them. To start, Jillian, we had a number of questions about how CalITP and these concepts would work for things like paratransit and same-day on-demand services, and other, mobility options for people with specialized needs, like older adults or people with disabilities. So I wondered if you could speak a little bit more about the CalITP work around that service area.
Sure. So we've heard some, as we've been working with much of the paratransit that's delivered is delivered by transit agencies. So we, working with the transit agencies, the fixed route transit agencies on contactless payments and general transit fee specifications, we've heard like really sad stories about what it's like to be what it can be like to be a paratransit customer in terms of payment, for example. So we hear stories about people in wheelchairs being on the side of the road with a $20 bill safety pinned to their suit or to their article of clothing. This is an unacceptable customer experience. So the payment rails are global. That's how you pay for your gum. It's how you pay for your groceries. It's how you should pay for your mobility. And you do pay for private mobility that way anyway. So that should be true on transit, and it should be true on paratransit as well. And if somebody doesn't have a debit or credit card because they're under or unbanked, welcome to the state of California. That's what we're doing. We're asking, why is that not the case? What is it going to take for everybody to have an account like that? And fortunately, we've been demonstrating with our partners that having a commercial bank account is not the requirement to be part of the global financial payment system. So we're working with Square, for instance, in Monterey Salinas. Square accounts are free. They use progressive know your customer rules. They'll issue a debit account for somebody who's underbanked. It's a real live payment account. And you can associate your discount on paratransit as a member of the disability community. You will be able to do that using our eligibility verification tool. So that's how I would answer that. E, do you want to add on to that a little bit? What about our work at ITS for us?
Yeah, regarding the data and information about what transit service is actually available to you, one of the biggest holes in that historically has been on-demand services and paratransit services, where it looks like you're in a transit desert if you look on Google Maps, but in fact, you may have any number of paratransit or on-demand services available to you if you happen to know about them, if you happen to see a flyer, if your friend happened to hear about it from their cousin or something like that. And unfortunately, one of the biggest barriers to using these services is just knowing how to use them. And we're looking to, again, to the answer of data standards as one of the ways to clear this up. And there's a global data standard called Gtfs Flex, which covers on-demand services, and some very important extensions to that we're working on called capabilities, and there's a few others that basically daylight, if I am a person with X qualifications, I am a person who qualifies for a paratransit service, I'm a person who can't use regular transit for any reason, or I'm just a person in a transit desert, like that you can plug that into your phone and you will actually see that service is available to you, and not just see that, but have a way to click here to be able to request a ride, no matter what service or platform you're operating on. And we have a large project in coordination with using a federal grant in coordination with Oregon DOT and Washington State DOT to basically make that available and coordinated, and we're working on making that data available statewide. And we see it as a huge priority for us in this coming year. And as the data standards come along, we will make sure that the data is available and make sure that that gets to the people who need to know it.
Yeah, I mean, one thing to just briefly touch on that, and it's super low key, but incredibly important, is until we started our work, there was not a published list of all of the operators in California. Like, you can't take transit you cannot see. Who provides it? Are they a company? Where are they? What is their service? Like, if you want to have customers, what's your product? So that's one of the things that we put up on the California Mobility Marketplace, super low key, but super impactful. There are over 400 agencies. It's an enormous market that is really untapped. And if you go to California, camobilitymarketplace.org, one thing that you'll see is our provider map. and you can tip out the data and just understand, a very basic building block, which is, where is the service? Who provides it?
Thank you for that. We also got some questions. I think this might be for E, just building on what we were just talking about around specifications like GTFS, include information on wayfinding systems for people who are blind or visually impaired, or have other specialized information needs. Anything you want to add to that on that?
Yeah, I'll just add that's another area where we're actively working on augmenting the specification itself so we can all speak in the same language, and each application doesn't have to reinvent the wheel or work, in each transit service provider doesn't have to rethink about how that information should be provided to the blind or visually impaired customers that they have. And so there are several different specification extensions, mainly through something called Gtfs Pathways, which I can put a link to, which actually come up with ways to describe the topology of a system when you're walking around a station or walking around a cluster of stops, so that, and then be able to come up with descriptions to actually say, like, okay, walk from here to there. This is what you should feel for. This is what you should understand. There's also a few other, and then also working on text to speech translations, which is another GTFS extension that's partially implemented already. And we're working on making that a more first-class user experience, and our partners with various maps and apps providers, making sure that that the user experience when you hear directions for driving right now is awesome, because they expect everybody to be hopefully looking at the road and not at their smartphones. But right now, if you navigate via transit, it'll say, for my example, it'll say 4 to Ave in E, take right, and then it's like it doesn't sound out the for fourth. It doesn't say northeast for northeast. And that's just an easy example. There's some that are like indistinguishable that sound totally different. And so there is a field called GTFS text to speech. It's implemented. We just need to get the maps and apps to actually use it. And we need to keep making sure that we're continuously improving to provide that first-class user experience for all Californians.
Amazing. Thank you for that. We're getting down to the end here, so I'm going to just rapid fire a few more questions. We had a couple of folks ask about travelers, transit riders without a bank account or cell phone, and how to ensure that they can still continue to pay for mobility services. Do we have, CalITP, do we have information about cash-based transit users and their payment preferences and their needs? Yuran, maybe you could start with this.
Yeah, so let me start indeed, and I'm sure Gillian has something to say at the end of this. So one, I think this is also, one of the key differentiators of this program. So rather than thinking, okay, we got a group of people that do not have something that we know that they need, we come up with the California card system or something, or like something special. We took a different approach because we used the Lego blocks in the common rail, the EMV, we could also leverage some of the products out there which are very well targeted at like this, exactly the group of people that need transit most. Because you don't all have to reinvent the wheel. Some of these examples, like Square was used, but there's many more at the moment. Small fintech firms, they use the same technology rail, but they're very good and they're specialized, and their business model is all about making sure that the communities are reached that need this transit. And also from our perspective, again, globally, this is the first place where we were able to do that, and the results are really phenomenal. Second, if there is also like a special city card, like the Angelino card now being issued in Los Angeles, that is a contactless EMV card as well. So yes, there is a special program, and we can leverage that in the transit approach as we just laid out from day one, if the transit agencies would accept contactless payment. So I think that's where you can see these two kind of pillars coming together. It's not necessary to define and issue a special transit card for people that do not have their bank card or their Apple phone. No, we can use multiple different solutions, but that are issued at the way which is really dedicated to them. And taking that step first has been, I think, a much faster implementation rate to the people that need it, rather than us thinking for 2 more years about specifying a special California transit card.
Yeah, a special California transit card that you can only use on transit. And when you get off of transit, you still can't use it to buy a donut or a cup of coffee. I mean, I think let's be really frank here. Saying, well, what about the cash paying customer? Therefore, we need to continue to strap an Iron Maiden to the floors of a bus, of every bus in California. That's not a great customer experience. And it, in fact, is chaining the customer to a legacy system that needs to go away. We need digital alternatives for everyone. And those digital alternatives today are cheaper and faster and safer than cash. So we need to ask the question about, like, what can we do to stop having our own products literally become the gates towards somebody entering the financial system. So the longer we issue, our brand of cards with murals on it, the longer that customer isn't part of the financial payment system. And I think, go talk to a low-income customer in California, and those that have social benefits from us, from a variety of programs, you'll see they have a card for this, a card for that, a chip for this, a chip for that in their wallet. If I lose my wallet or my phone, I curse the universe, but I call an 800 number and I get my card back. If you're my neighbors that have well-meaning payment products from us in their wallet, it could take them a year or more to get all of those cards back. That's not okay.
Great, thank you. Thank you for that. Shifting just slightly, we had a question in the chat about the hardware requirements, and I think might be a great moment to talk a bit more about the sort of vision for Cal ITP broadly around access for other states and other agencies to pull in onto those contracts. And specifically, where folks were wondering what are the sort of requirements for the validators, the payment validators on buses and trains, and do they require GPS or internet connectivity in order to function in the system?
Yeah, so they do require, you have to have for a payment transaction, what you want for a payment transaction to be is in real time. You want the customer to know, to get the little notice that they've been charged as soon as possible. So point of sale terminals for transit, which we call validators because we always have a different name for everything, should connect to the internet. They can connect via a SIM card, or they can connect via the Wi-Fi on your bus. They can, the ones that we've seen can store the data for several days if necessary. But you really want to optimize it for the customer experience. So you either want Wi-Fi or a SIM card. And
you don't want to know where the validator is. So GPS is part of the mix, whether it's a GPS in the validator or GPS on the vehicle. Either way, it needs to know where it is, because that ties in back to this discussion that the story from Elizabeth, because then the validator also knows where it is. You know where the bus is, and then the payment and the planning fits nicely together. Right, which is why GTFS real-time is a prerequisite to doing payments properly, right? You want the device to be stupid. You want it to just be able to hoover up the data of what the closest stop is, right? So whether the GPS tracker is in the device, or whether it's you have a different GPS tracker on your train or your bus, the location of the vehicle is known, and therefore the machine can calculate the closest published stop. Boom.
Great, thank you for that. Just quickly, we had a couple of comments about the demonstration projects that Lori mentioned. So wanted to just quickly say that as part of those, the transit agencies did a tremendous amount of engagement and training for the bus operators and the riders to explain the system and provide options for people to understand how to use it. So that was a key piece of the demonstration projects. And then as Jillian mentioned, we're working also with the transit providers and the agency to track metrics of progress over time. So looking at things like on-time performance, utilization of the new systems, and things like that. So definitely something to come as we have more time and more experience with the agencies in this contactless fair payment system. Finally, had a couple of comments and questions about access to the presentation and the chat. So we'll be sharing with ITS America the presentation slides with links to California Mobility Marketplace, as well as the draft minimum GTFS guidelines. So links will all be provided to you there in case you couldn't access them through the fast chat today. So finally, the last question I wanted to wrap up with is probably best for Lori, which is we've talked a lot today about transit agencies and public transit providers, but what about other modes of transportation like microtransit or even scooter and bike sharing? How would they be able to participate in the mobility marketplace, and how are we thinking longer term about integration with other non-transit modes?
Yeah, that's a fantastic question. Because it gives me an opportunity to talk about the large vision of CalITP. Let's just say this is an ongoing, evolving program. And what we're doing right now is we are starting with transit and testing technology, testing processes, and trying to kind of work out the kinks before layering on additional use cases, which would absolutely include the micromobility sector, TNCs, and any other mode of transportation and mobility. Our big vision is that people are just able to move seamlessly throughout the state without having to worry so much about what mode they're taking. Let's have an app, like any of the trip planning apps, take care of that for you. So that's kind of the big vision that we're going towards. Like I said, starting with transit, because we have to figure out the technology, and we would like to do that on a more focused area, and then just kind of layer on. The other piece of this is that there are use cases beyond transportation. If you think about automated benefit verification and contactless payments, we're trying, as has been mentioned by all of the panelists before, we're trying to make this so it's just as easy as retail. So anything you can do for transit, you can do on retail. Go buy a shirt, a cup of coffee, whatever you want. We're not looking to create a proprietary system. It's really looking at the payment system through the lens of mobility. So I hope that answers the question. We're very excited about, as you can tell, about this program and really where it can go. We obviously have a lot of ideas. But I think we are also looking for suggestions as this builds out over the years. So thank you all so much for joining us, and we look forward to staying in touch.
Rachel, back to you if you have any closing remarks, or if not, thanks everybody for joining, and that wraps us up for today.
Yes, thank you to our presenters today, to our attendees for attending. As Lily mentioned, everything will be up on the website shortly later today or tomorrow morning. Please reach out to me directly if you have any questions or would like to follow up with our panelists. And we thank you all for joining and welcome you to hopefully to our next event soon. Thank you.
Thank you.